My name is Nancy, and the day my parents handed my brother the keys to our family estate, I learned what betrayal truly tastes like. It is not loud or violent. It is quiet, elegant, sealed inside the sound of metal keys dropped into someone else's palm while you sit forgotten at the same table. The estate had never been just a house. It was history carved into stone and timber. Its white pillars had stood for more than 100 years, weathering storms and summers alike. The oak floors had been polished by generations of footsteps. The gardens bloomed each spring with roses my grandmother herself had planted. To me it was sacred. I was the one who stayed behind to help maintain it when my parents traveled. I was the one who rose early to sweep the porch when my father's back gave out, and who walked my mother through the orchard when she grew tired. It was my hands that repaired broken shutters, my laughter that filled its halls when everyone else had gone quiet. But that history was erased with a single announcement. It happened on a Sunday. The dining room was heavy with chatter, every chair filled by relatives who had gathered for what my parents called an important family decision. I had expected perhaps a toast, maybe some sentimental remembrance. But instead, I watched my brother Nathan sit at the head of the table, Cassandra, his sharp-tongued wife, clutching his hand as though she were already queen of the estate. My mother stood, her pearl necklace catching the chandelier's glow. She held a velvet box. Slowly, deliberately, she opened it, revealing a set of golden keys, polished to a shine. "Nathan," she said warmly, "the time has come. This estate is yours now. You are the rightful heir." Applause. Toasts. Smiles. A chorus of congratulations. I sat frozen, my nails digging crescents into my palm beneath the table. My lips forced into a polite smile that felt like it might shatter. Finally I found my voice, barely above a whisper. "And me." The room fell silent for a moment. Then my father chuckled dismissively. "Nancy, you'll understand. Estates pass to sons. That is how it has always been. You'll have your own path. This one belongs to Nathan." The words struck like blows. Estates pass to sons. As though my years of care, my devotion, my sacrifices meant nothing. Cassandra leaned toward me, her perfume sweet and suffocating. Her whisper cut sharper than any knife. "Don't worry, Nancy. We'll let you visit. As a guest." The laughter resumed. Nathan lifted the keys high like a trophy, the metal glinting in the chandelier's light. He twirled them between his fingers with the arrogance of a man who believed the world already belonged to him. I excused myself quietly, stepping into the hall. My legs felt weak. The portraits of our ancestors lined the walls, stern faces staring down from their frames. I paused before one of my grandmother, her eyes soft but firm even in paint. I whispered, "Did you know this would happen?" For a long moment I stood there in the dim hallway, listening to the muffled laughter from the dining room. I pressed my back against the wall, my chest tight, my throat burning. I was invisible. Disposable. But they didn't know what I knew. Years earlier, before she passed, my grandmother had confided in me. I remembered sitting with her in the parlor, her hand fragile in mine, her voice low but certain. She had told me she had updated her will, carefully, deliberately. "Nancy," she said, "this house belongs to the one who loves it, not the one who demands it. You cared for me when others didn't. When the time comes, you'll understand." Asterisk. Those words had lived quietly in the back of my mind ever since. I had never repeated them, never dared to hope. But as Nathan waved those keys, I felt her voice rise in me like a tide. That night, I returned to my small apartment. Anger and resolve churned in my veins. I opened the drawer where I kept my grandmother's letters. After digging through envelopes, I found the one marked with the seal of her lawyer. Inside, folded neatly, was the will. The true will. I held it in my hands, trembling. Every line of ink seemed to glow. My throat tightened as I whispered into the empty room. They gave him the keys. But the deed may tell another story. The betrayal of that Sunday burned like fire in my chest. They had written me out of my own family. But what they did not know was that I was holding the one thing that could rewrite the ending. Because what my parents staged as Nathan's grand triumph would soon be tested in court. And when the judge read the will aloud, none of them would be prepared for the truth. The golden keys haunted me. I could still hear them clinking in Nathan's hand, see the smug smile stretching across Cassandra's face. That image followed me home. into my dreams and back into my waking hours. For 2 days I said nothing. I told myself it was pride, tradition, maybe a misguided attempt by my parents to keep peace. But deep down I knew better. They had chosen him over me. Not because he had earned it, but because I was invisible to them. On the 3rd day, the betrayal grew teeth. I drove to the estate to collect a box of my belongings, books I had left in my old bedroom, a quilt my grandmother had stitched. But when I arrived, the front gate was locked. A new padlock gleamed under the sun. I dialed the intercom. Cassandra's voice crackled through. "Yes. It's me. Nancy. I've come for my things." A pause. Then laughter. "Oh, Nancy. You don't have access anymore. This is Nathan's home now. Whatever you left here, consider it part of the estate." The line went dead. My blood went cold. My grandmother's quilt. My letters. My photographs. The pieces of my life still inside those walls had been dismissed as estate property. I pounded on the gate shouting, "You can't do this. It's still my home too." A car rolled up the driveway. Nathan stepped out wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit, the keys jingling in his pocket. His smirk mirrored Cassandra's. "Nancy, you're embarrassing yourself. Go home. This isn't yours anymore." "It was never yours," I shot back. He leaned close to the gate, his tone low, poisonous. "Then prove it. Take me to court. But you'll regret it. Do you really think Mom and Dad will stand on your side?" He was right. I could already hear my father's stern voice. "Don't disgrace the family, Nancy. Don't drag us into court." And my mother's weary sigh. "Why must you always cause trouble?" They had already chosen their heir. I was nothing more than an obstacle. That night, I sat in my apartment with the will open before me, hands trembling as I read it line by line. My grandmother's words, carefully typed, bore a stamp and a signature that could not be denied. "The estate shall pass to my granddaughter Nancy Hale, in recognition of her care, devotion, and commitment to this family's legacy." The words made me weep, not out of weakness but out of fury. My grandmother had seen me. She had known. And yet my parents had buried her wishes beneath their obsession with tradition. I knew then. Nathan wasn't holding keys. He was holding stolen property. The next morning I went to see my parents. They were in the sitting room, the fire crackling. My father looked up from his paper with annoyance. "Nancy, what is it now?" I laid the will on the coffee table. "This. You both knew. You both chose to ignore her." My mother paled. My father's jaw tightened. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. "From her lawyer. From the truth. She gave this to me years ago. You pretended it didn't exist. But this," I tapped the page with shaking fingers, "is legal. It's binding." My father's hand trembled as he reached for his glass. "Nancy, don't be foolish. This was a draft. An idea. It means nothing." My mother's voice was softer, but no less cruel. "You know how your grandmother was. Sentimental. She probably just wanted to make you feel special. Nathan is the rightful heir." The dismissal stung worse than any slap. "Special?" I hissed. "She didn't give me words to make me feel better. She gave me the estate because I earned it. And you erased me." Cassandra appeared then, slipping in like a snake, draping her arm around Nathan. "Honestly, Nancy, this is pathetic. Waving around old papers as if they matter. Everyone knows the keys decide the future, not some sentimental will." Her words sealed my resolve. I stood tall, clutching the will to my chest. "No, Cassandra. The keys are a trick. But the deed, the law, those will decide. And when they do, it won't be Nathan standing at the head of this family." Because that same evening, as I prepared to visit my grandmother's lawyer for confirmation, an envelope was slid under my apartment door. No return address. No signature. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 4 words scrawled across it in bold ink. "You will lose everything." The anonymous note sat on my kitchen table like poison. "You will lose everything." The letters were jagged, rushed, almost carved into the page. I turned it over, searching for clues, but there was nothing. No signature, no watermark, just a message meant to shake me. But instead of fear, I felt clarity. If they were resorting to threats, then they were afraid. The next morning, I walked into my grandmother's lawyer's office, clutching the will. Mr. Reynolds was an older man, his hair silver, his voice calm. He took the document carefully, adjusted his glasses and read every word. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes steady. "This is authentic, Nancy. Your grandmother signed this in my presence. It was witnessed and sealed properly. This will is valid." Relief surged through me, but it was tangled with anger. Then why do my parents and Nathan act as if it doesn't exist? He sighed. Because wills only speak when courts force them to. Families bury things. Pretend. And unless someone demands the law be heard, silence wins. I swallowed hard. Then I'll demand it. Reynolds leaned back in his chair. Good. But you must be ready. If they forged locks and sent threats, they won't stop there. They'll challenge this will, question your character, paint you as unstable. You need evidence, every scrap of it. That became my mission. I started with the estate itself. Though Cassandra had locked me out, I still had friends among the staff. One of the gardeners, Luis, had known me since I was a child. He met me quietly at the edge of the property one evening. "Señorita Nancy," he whispered. I saw papers. Cassandra brought movers inside. Boxes labeled documents from the study. She told Nathan to hide them. My pulse raced. "Can you describe them?" He nodded. "One had your grandmother's handwriting. Old letters. She called them trash. But I know they mattered." He promised to testify if needed. His loyalty felt like a light in the dark. Next, I visited the county office. The clerk there, a tired woman with kind eyes, helped me check property filings. She slid a record across the counter. My breath caught. Nathan had already filed a petition to transfer ownership of the estate into his name, without mentioning the will. His arrogance left a paper trail. At home, I gathered every letter my grandmother had written me. In them she spoke of the estate, her hopes for me, her gratitude for my care. They weren't legal documents, but they were powerful. Words written in her own hand carried weight. I built a binder. Page by page it grew heavier. The certified will, signed and witnessed. Nathan's premature petition. Cassandra's text messages saved on my phone, mocking me for being just a guest. Letters from my grandmother, tender and clear. Notes from neighbors who had seen me caring for her, even when the rest of the family stayed away. Still, the threats continued. Another envelope slid under my door. This one contained a photocopy of my grandmother's will, but the name scratched out, replaced sloppily with Nathan's. Below, in Cassandra's sharp handwriting, were the words, "This is how the judge will see it." I took it straight to Reynolds. He frowned, his lips pressed tight. "This isn't just intimidation, Nancy. This is attempted forgery. If they're bold enough to scratch names here, they may be bold enough to produce false copies in court. We'll need handwriting experts. Forensic analysis. Everything airtight." The more we uncovered, the clearer their desperation became. My parents refused to return my calls. Cassandra blocked me entirely. Nathan sent one curt message. "You can't fight tradition. Stop embarrassing yourself." But tradition wasn't law. And my grandmother's voice was stronger than their arrogance. One evening, as I sorted papers at my desk, Julia, my oldest friend, came by. She watched silently as I stacked letters, highlighted lines, built my fortress of evidence. Finally, she said, "Nancy, this isn't just about the house, is it?" I paused. "No. It's about respect. About not being erased from my own family." She nodded. "Then I'll help. Whatever you need, witnesses, errands, someone to sit beside you in court, I'm here." Her presence steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. By midnight, the binder was complete. Each page was a stone in the wall I was building against them. I placed it on the table, heavy and certain. Because just as I closed the cover, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number again. But this time it contained a photograph. A blurred image of me through my apartment window. And beneath it, 6 words. "Next time the house burns first." The photo of me through my own window lay on the table, my phone screen still glowing. 6 words glared beneath it. "Next time the house burns first." My stomach twisted, but the fear no longer paralyzed me. It hardened into steel. If they were willing to stalk me, to threaten fire, then they were terrified of losing. And that meant my evidence was strong. But strength alone wouldn't win in court. I needed allies. The first person I called was Julia. She arrived within the hour, her coat still damp from rain, her eyes blazing. She looked at the photograph and cursed under her breath. They're desperate. That's good for us. It means they know they're cornered. But Nancy, she placed her hand on mine. You can't do this alone. It's time to build a team. I nodded. I already started with Reynolds. He believes in the will. But we'll need more. The next day, I met Reynolds again in his office. He listened carefully as I laid out the threats, the forged copy of the will, the intimidation. His eyes narrowed. This is no longer just a probate dispute. This is harassment, possibly criminal. We'll document every message. We'll bring in handwriting experts to authenticate both wills and letters. And we'll subpoena anyone who saw Cassandra removing documents from the estate. He scribbled notes, his calm voice steadying me. Nancy, I've seen families tear themselves apart in these battles. But the law is on your side. What we need now are witnesses. Witnesses. People willing to speak the truth. I drove straight to see Luis, the gardener who had already hinted at Cassandra's orders. We met at a cafe far from town, his hands rough from work, his eyes kind but cautious. When I asked if he would testify, he hesitated. They will come after me, he said softly. They already came after me, I answered. If we stay silent, they win. If we speak, the truth wins. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll speak. I saw her box the papers. I saw her laugh about throwing away your grandmother's letters. I'll tell the court. Hope flickered inside me. I also visited Mrs. Grant, my grandmother's old neighbor. She was frail but sharp, her memory intact. When I explained the situation, her eyes hardened. I remember how you cared for your grandmother, Nancy. Every evening, you walked her around the garden while Nathan was nowhere to be found. If they try to paint you as absent, I'll tell the truth. You were there. Always. Piece by piece, my allies gathered. At night, Julia and I organized everything in my apartment. The binder grew into 2, then 3. Letters, receipts, photographs, statements. Julia created color-coded tabs. Red for forgeries, blue for evidence of my care, yellow for Cassandra's interference. We worked until our eyes blurred, fueled by coffee and determination. At one point, Julia looked at me over a stack of papers. Nancy, you realize what's happening, right? You're not just fighting for a house. You're fighting for your name. They tried to erase you from your own bloodline. This is your chance to remind them who you are. Her words lit something inside me. She was right. It wasn't just walls and keys. It was identity. It was dignity. By the end of the week, Reynolds had filed our motion. The court date was set. Nathan and Cassandra would be forced to present their evidence. And we would be ready. Still, the threats didn't stop. Another letter arrived, this time slipped into my mailbox. Drop this or regret it. I showed it to Reynolds, who only nodded. Good. Let them keep writing. Every threat is another nail in their coffin. One evening, as Julia and I finished sorting files, she leaned back in her chair, exhaustion etched into her face. Nancy, promise me something. When this is over, when you win, don't let them break you again. Houses can be rebuilt. Names can't. Promised. For the first time in weeks, I felt less alone. Because just as I began to breathe easier, Reynolds called with urgency in his voice. Nancy, we've uncovered something new. Cassandra and Nathan have filed their own version of the will. They plan to present it as genuine. If the judge believes them, everything could collapse. Reynolds' voice over the phone was sharp, more urgent than I had ever heard it. Nancy, they've filed their own version of the will. It looks professional, typed, sealed, notarized. If the judge accepts it as genuine, they'll argue yours is the forgery. For a long moment, silence pressed against me. My heart hammered in my chest. They hadn't just locked me out, mocked me, or threatened me, they had gone further. They had manufactured an entire lie, polished and stamped. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. Then we'll break it apart. Line by line. That evening, Reynolds, Julia, and I sat around his long oak desk, our binders spread wide. Rain tapped at the window, and the lamp cast long shadows over the stacks of paper. Reynolds laid out their submission. It looked legitimate, perfect margins, signatures, even a notary stamp. On the surface it's airtight, he admitted. But fakes always leave cracks. Our job is to find them before the court date. Julia leaned forward, eyes blazing. So what do we do? How do we crush this? Reynolds ticked off the steps. First, handwriting analysis. We compare the signatures. Their will is dated after your grandmother's death by nearly 6 months. No one can sign from the grave. That alone is suspicious. Second, the notary. We'll track down the officer whose stamp appears here. If he or she didn't witness the signing, the whole thing collapses. Third, testimony. We present people who saw your grandmother, heard her intentions, read her letters. Their forgery can't erase living memory. I nodded slowly. The plan was taking shape. Julia added. And what about the threats? The fake copy they sent you with Nathan's name scratched in? That shows intent. Exactly, Reynolds said. We used their arrogance against them. They thought intimidation would scare Nancy into silence. Instead, it becomes proof of a pattern. The room filled with the sound of turning pages, scribbled notes, whispered strategies. We made lists of witnesses. Louise the gardener, Mrs. Grant the neighbor, Julia herself. Each had a piece of the truth. Together, they would paint a picture no forgery could erase. Then we turned to the forensic angle. Reynolds contacted a handwriting expert he trusted. A woman named Evelyn Ross who had testified in dozens of high-profile cases. She agreed to analyze both wills and issue a report. If the ink, the strokes, or even the paper stock don't align, Reynolds explained, the court will see through their trick. I sat quietly for a moment staring at the papers. My brother's name. Cassandra's sharp handwriting in the margins of earlier threats. My parents' silence. It was all a web and I was the fly they thought they had caught. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't trapped. I was waiting. Julia broke the silence. Nancy, when you walk into that courtroom, you need more than documents. You need presence. You need to look like the rightful heir, not just on paper but in spirit. Her words struck me. They had spent months painting me as weak, disposable, unworthy. I couldn't let them see me bend. So I prepared, not just legally but personally. I rehearsed what I would say if asked about my grandmother, about the estate, about Nathan. I practiced answering without anger, without tears. Calm. Steady. Certain. Reynolds gave me one final piece of advice. Let them underestimate you, Nancy. Let them smirk and sneer. Because when the judge reads the real will, and when we expose their forgery, the humiliation will be theirs. Not yours. I carried those words home with me. That night I walked through my apartment, touching the edges of my grandmother's letters, the quilt she had sewn, the photographs of her smile. These were not just objects. They were anchors. Proof that love had lived here, that devotion had roots. And I promised her aloud. They think lies will win. But I'll show them that truth has longer legs. By the time dawn broke, the counterplan was set. We would expose the forgery, reveal the threats, line up the witnesses, and let the law speak louder than family politics. But just as I felt ready, Reynolds called again with new urgency. Nancy, we may have a complication. The judge assigned to your case? He's an old family friend of your father. This trial won't be neutral. We'll need to be sharper than ever. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse loomed like a fortress. Its stone columns rose high, cold and indifferent. I clutched my binder to my chest, Julia at my side, Reynolds walking firmly ahead. Every step echoed with the weight of my grandmother's promise. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Nathan sat smugly at the table opposite me, Cassandra whispering in his ear, her crimson lips curled into a smile. My parents sat behind them, my father upright and stern, my mother avoiding my gaze. To them I was not a daughter. They had already erased me. And then the door opened. The judge entered. My breath caught. I recognized him instantly. Judge Harrington. He had attended dinners at our estate when I was a girl. He had laughed with my father, shared cigars, patted Nathan on the head. Reynolds' warning rang in my ears. This trial won't be neutral. The gavel struck once. This court will come to order. Nathan's attorney rose immediately, voice polished and confident. He presented their version of the will with theatrical precision, sliding the document forward as if it were holy scripture. Your Honor, this is the rightful will of Margaret Hale. It names Nathan Hale as heir to the estate. It has been notarized, witnessed, and filed properly. The opposition will claim otherwise, but tradition and evidence are clear. The judge nodded, his expression unreadable, but I saw it. The faint flicker of familiarity in his eyes when he looked at Nathan. My stomach twisted. Reynolds stood, his voice calm but sharp. Your Honor, the document they present is a forgery. Dated 6 months after Margaret Hale's death. We have handwriting experts, forensic analysis, and living witnesses who will testify to her true intent. We will show that my client Nancy Hale was not only named in the genuine will but was the only rightful heir. Nathan leaned back, smirking. Cassandra squeezed his hand. Then came the first pivot. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Reynolds, before we begin, I must disclose that I was acquainted with the Hale family in years past. This will not affect my judgment, but transparency is necessary. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Transparency? Or warning? Reynolds inclined his head respectfully. We appreciate the disclosure, Your Honor. But I saw his hand tighten on the edge of the table. The proceedings began. Nathan's lawyer paraded the forged will, pointing to seals and signatures. Cassandra even produced photographs of family gatherings, claiming my grandmother had always intended Nathan to inherit. My parents nodded dutifully from their seats, their silence damning. When it was our turn, Reynolds presented the authentic will. Evelyn Ross, the handwriting expert, took the stand and explained how the strokes of Margaret Hale's signature matched every genuine letter she had ever written, and how Nathan's version betrayed subtle inconsistencies. The judge listened, but his eyes drifted often toward my father. My chest tightened with dread. At recess, Julia pulled me aside. Nancy, this judge. He's leaning toward them. You can see it. We have to pivot. We can't just rely on documents. We need to force the truth into the open. Reynolds joined us, his face grave. She's right. The evidence is strong, but if Harrington decides to interpret tradition over truth, we're sunk. We need something undeniable, something so public it ties his hands. I thought of the threats. The forged copies Cassandra had mailed me. The photograph taken through my window. My stomach turned, but I realized Julia was right. These weren't just side notes. They were the proof of a scheme. We show the threats, I whispered. Reynolds hesitated. They'll argue they're fake. But if we present them now in front of the court, it forces Harrington to address the intimidation. Judges loathe interference in probate cases. The plan shifted in that moment. We weren't just defending a will. We were exposing a conspiracy. As the recess ended, I glanced across the courtroom. Nathan sat confidently, certain tradition would carry him. Cassandra smirked, believing her forged papers were unbreakable. My parents refused to meet my eyes. They thought they had already won. Because just as we prepared to unveil the threats, a court clerk rushed forward with an announcement. Your Honor, new evidence has been filed this morning by Nathan Hale's counsel. And when I saw the folder handed to the judge, my blood ran cold. The courtroom hushed as the clerk handed the folder to Judge Harrington. My palms went slick, my throat tight. Nathan's lawyer stood tall, his voice dripping with confidence. Your Honor, we have located additional documents that further prove Margaret Hale's intent to leave the estate exclusively to her grandson, Nathan. These letters, found among family possessions, demonstrate her wishes in her own words. Cassandra's eyes gleamed as she glanced back at me, a predator savoring the kill. The judge opened the folder, scanning quickly. His brows lifted slightly. These appear to be personal letters. Yes, Your Honor, Nathan's lawyer pressed. Written to Nancy, ironically. But notice the language. Margaret thanks Nancy for her companionship but clearly states the estate will remain in the line of men. This affirms tradition and matches the notarized will. He placed the pages on the evidence table. The words swam before me. My grandmother's handwriting, but twisted. Lines had been cut, rearranged. It looked genuine, but I recognized the manipulation instantly. Julia leaned toward me. They butchered her letters. They spliced sentences together. Reynolds stood slowly, his voice sharp. Your Honor, these so-called letters are fabrications. We request immediate forensic review. But first, with the court's permission, we'd like to introduce our evidence. The judge hesitated, glancing at my father in the gallery, then back at Reynolds. "Proceed." Reynolds nodded to me. My hand shook as I rose, binder in hand. I walked to the stand, every eye drilling into me. Nathan smirked, certain I would crumble. But I didn't. I laid the threats on the table. The forged copy with Nathan's name scratched in. The photograph of me through my apartment window. The letters promising I would lose everything, and warning that the house burns first. A gasp rippled through the room. "These," Reynolds said, holding them high, "were delivered directly to my client's door. Intimidation tactics tied to the very individuals claiming inheritance. Note Cassandra's handwriting on this forgery. Note the photograph, taken through Nancy's private window. This is not the behavior of rightful heirs. This is the behavior of conspirators." Cassandra leapt to her feet. "That's a lie. I never." But before she could finish, the handwriting expert, Evelyn Ross, returned to the stand. She held both the forged will and the newly presented letters. Her testimony rang clear. These documents contain multiple splice patterns, sentences lifted from genuine letters and rearranged. The ink used is modern, and the signature, though traced, lacks natural flow. All of this points to forgery, not once but twice. Nathan's face drained of color. He slammed his fist on the table. "She's lying. It's all lies." But his outburst only made the silence that followed louder. I rose to speak. My voice shook at first but steadied with every word. My grandmother entrusted me with her wishes. She updated her will because she saw me, not as weak, not as invisible, but as someone worthy of carrying this home. Nathan and Cassandra forged her words, her name, even threatened me to silence me. But today she speaks for herself, through the will she signed. The truth does not die because they wish it. The judge's gaze moved between us all. His expression was unreadable, but the weight of the evidence had shifted. He tapped the gavel lightly. "The court will accept the authentic will into record. The contested documents are dismissed as fraudulent. The matter of forgery will be referred for criminal investigation." Gasps broke through the room. Cassandra covered her face with her hands. Nathan collapsed into his chair, eyes wild with panic. My father clenched his fists, my mother finally looking at me with something like shame. The gavel cracked once more. "The estate, per Margaret Hale's will, is awarded to Nancy Hale." It was over. But as I turned, heart pounding with both triumph and grief, Nathan's voice broke across the courtroom. Low, furious, dripping with venom. "This isn't finished, Nancy. You may have the deed, but you'll never have a family again." And in that moment, surrounded by silence, I realized he was right about one thing. The house was mine. But the cost would be exile from the family I once loved. The gavel's echo was still ringing in my ears when the courtroom erupted. Whispers, gasps, the shuffle of feet. It was as if the entire room had taken one collective breath and released it at once. Nathan sat slumped at the table, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles blanched white. Cassandra hissed at him in a harsh whisper, her composure gone. Her lipstick smeared as she muttered, "You promised this was airtight." He shoved her hand away, his jaw clenched, eyes burning holes into me. Behind them, my father stood stiff as stone. His face was unreadable, carved into a mask of pride too brittle to admit defeat. My mother sat pale, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. For the first time she looked at me, not with disdain but with something closer to regret. The bailiff called for order, guiding us out row by row. Reporters gathered near the exit, cameras flashing, microphones raised. "Nancy, how does it feel to inherit the estate? Do you have anything to say to your brother? Were you surprised by the ruling?" I kept my chin high, but inside my heart raced. Julia placed a firm hand on my back, whispering, "Don't answer now. Walk straight. Dignity is the best answer." Outside, the cold air struck my face like clarity. People crowded the courthouse steps. Neighbors from town, faces familiar and not, watched with curiosity. Some nodded at me with quiet approval. Others shook their heads at Nathan as he stormed down the steps, Cassandra trailing behind him, her heels clattering furiously. One voice from the crowd pierced the noise. "Shame on you, Nathan. She cared for your grandmother when none of you did." Nathan froze, his shoulders rigid. For a moment I thought he might turn and lunge, But Cassandra pulled him toward the waiting car. They disappeared inside, doors slamming shut. I stood there, binder still in my arms as if it were armor. Reporters kept shouting, flashes popping like sparks. Julia leaned close. "Smile once, Nancy. Let them see you won." So I did. A small, steady smile. Not triumph, not arrogance, just truth. That evening, the fallout began to ripple wider. The local news ran the story before dinner. Forgery exposed in family estate battle. Judge awards property to granddaughter. The footage showed me leaving the courthouse, binder clutched, flanked by Julia and Reynolds. It showed Nathan shoving cameras, Cassandra covering her face. My phone buzzed endlessly. Some messages were kind. "Mrs. Grant called, her voice trembling with joy. "Your grandmother would be so proud, Nancy. She always said you had her strength." Louise left me a message too, promising to keep the gardens alive until I was ready to return. But not all calls were kind. My father's voice thundered down the line. "You've humiliated this family. Do you understand? You've dragged our name through mud." He hung up before I could answer. Minutes later, a text from my mother. "I didn't know they would go that far. I'm sorry, but you've made enemies you can't erase." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. Even in apology, she distanced herself, as though my victory was somehow shameful. That night, Julia and I sat in my apartment, the binder now closed, the weight of it finally lifting. She poured 2 glasses of wine and raised hers toward me. "To you, Nancy. To truth. To not letting them bury you." I touched my glass to hers, the sound sharp and clean. But as I sipped, my gaze drifted to the window. The memory of that threatening photograph, the one taken through this very glass, still haunted me. I asked quietly, "Do you think Nathan will stop?" Julia's smile faded. "No. People like him don't stop when they lose. They only plot the next move. But that doesn't change what happened today. Today you won." Her words steadied me. Later, when she left, I stood alone in my apartment. The silence was heavy but different. Not the silence of fear, but of aftermath. The house, my grandmother's estate, was legally mine now. The truth had spoken. Yet the cost was clear. I had walked out of court with a deed in hand, but the ties to my parents, my brother, even extended family, had frayed to breaking. Because as midnight crept closer, a new message appeared on my phone. This one from an unknown number. It read, "Enjoy the house while you can. Winter has a way of burning down old estates." The morning after the verdict, sunlight filtered through my curtains, but peace did not come with it. My phone had already been buzzing since dawn. The first message was from a neighbor. "Saw you on the news last night, Nancy. Good for you." Finally someone stood up to them. Another read, "Your grandmother would be smiling today." But then came the darker ones. Anonymous texts. "You've destroyed your family. Blood is thicker than deeds." And the most chilling, "Houses can catch fire in winter." The words twisted my stomach. It was one thing to win in court, another to wonder if every shadow outside my window was someone waiting to make good on a threat. Julia arrived mid-morning, groceries in her arms. She insisted on cooking breakfast while I sat at the table, reading through dozens of voicemails. Some were kind, some were cruel. My father's was the harshest. "You think a judge makes you an heir? You are no daughter of mine. Don't come to this family again. Don't show your face at our door." I replayed it twice, my chest tightening each time. My mother had left a shorter one. Her voice trembled. "I can't choose between you and Nathan. But you've made your choice clear. Don't expect forgiveness." Julia set down a plate in front of me, eggs steaming, toast crisp. "Eat," she said firmly. "You can't fight on an empty stomach." I smiled weakly but barely tasted the food. My appetite had left me somewhere between victory and loss. Later that afternoon, Reynolds called. His voice was calm but steady. "Nancy, the DA's office has opened an investigation. Nathan and Cassandra may face charges for forgery and fraud. It will take time, but the wheels are turning. For now, you're secure. The estate deed is officially in your name. No one can take that from you." Secure. The word felt fragile in my ears. By evening, the news spread wider. Reporters camped near the estate gates. Cameras pointed at the long driveway. Some locals drove past slowly, craning their necks to glimpse the house now tied to scandal. Online, articles debated tradition versus truth. Some siding with Nathan, others calling me brave. My name trended for the first time in my life. When I finally dared to visit the estate the next day, the gate stood tall, the padlock gone. Luis met me there, his face breaking into a smile. "Señorita Nancy," he said warmly. "It's yours now. Finally." I stepped inside. The gardens were bare in winter, the roses asleep. The halls were cold, dust clinging to the air. Yet every creak of the floor, every portrait on the wall, felt like my grandmother welcoming me home. Still, the silence was uneasy. I checked each lock, each window. I couldn't forget the threats. That night, alone in my grandmother's bedroom, I sat by the fire with her quilt wrapped around my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I let myself cry, not out of fear but out of grief. Grief for the family I had lost. Grief for the boy Nathan once was. Grief for the mother who chose silence over truth. But even through the tears, I felt stronger. The house was not just wood and stone. It was my proof that I could not be erased. As I drifted toward sleep, my phone buzzed again on the nightstand. A new message and signed, "This isn't over. The estate may be yours on paper, but you'll never hold it in peace." My chest tightened, but I didn't crumble. Instead, I whispered into the quiet room, as if my grandmother could still hear me. "Then let them come. I have truth on my side." Because even as I braced myself, I knew tomorrow would bring something bigger than messages. And when I woke, the knock at the door proved it. An officer stood outside, holding a fresh summons in his hand. The knock at the door echoed through the halls of the estate. For a moment I froze, staring at the officer's silhouette through the frosted glass. I opened the door, bracing myself. He handed me a sealed envelope. "Miss Nancy Hale? You've been served." I took it with steady hands, thanked him politely, and closed the door. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. A new summons. Nathan was countersuing me for emotional distress and manipulation of family assets. The language was sharp, dripping with venom. For a moment, old fear gripped me. But then I laughed softly to myself. This was his last weapon. Noise. The truth had already spoken in court. The deed was mine, the investigation underway. His countersuit was nothing but desperation, a shadow of a battle he had already lost. I placed the papers on the mantel, directly beneath my grandmother's portrait. Her eyes, painted decades before, seemed to meet mine with calm approval. "Don't worry," I whispered. "They can keep filing papers. The truth is still mine." The weeks that followed were heavy but clarifying. Reporters eventually left the gates. Neighbors offered quiet words of support. The district attorney pressed forward with charges against Nathan and Cassandra. My parents, true to their threats, cut off all contact. Their silence was both wound and relief. I poured my energy into the estate. With Luis's help, I cleared the gardens, repainted the shutters, and opened windows that had been locked tight for months. Slowly, the house began to breathe again. Slowly, so did I. At night, I sat in the parlor with my grandmother's quilt, remembering her words. "This house belongs to the one who loves it, not the one who demands it." And she had been right. Nathan had demanded. Cassandra had schemed. My parents had chosen tradition over truth. But I had loved. I had cared. And in the end, that was what endured. If you are listening to my story, let me leave you with this. Sometimes betrayal does not come from strangers. It comes from the people who raised you, the ones who should protect you most. That betrayal cuts deepest because it is laced with love you once trusted. But betrayal does not mean defeat. Silence, when used with purpose, can be power. Evidence, gathered patiently, can outshine lies. And truth, unwavering, undeniable truth, can strip even the boldest fraud to nothing. My name is Nancy. My parents gave my brother the estate keys, certain I would disappear quietly. But when the judge read my grandmother's will, those keys turned to dust in Nathan's hand. The deed was mine, not because I shouted, but because I stood firm. So if you have ever been dismissed, erased, or told you don't matter, remember this. You are not powerless. You are not invisible. When you carry truth, you carry strength greater than any forged paper or cruel whisper. Do not let anyone erase you. Subscribe if you believe every betrayal deserves its reckoning. Share this story with someone who needs reminding that truth always finds its way to the light. And never forget, Justice is worth fighting for, even when it comes at the cost of family.